Okay, friendship and war, camaraderie, and prevention of PTSD prevention. So, an overview of PTSD. PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. Basically, it's when you experience something traumatic and you could have nightmares after this. It's very common after soldiers go to war because they have something traumatic. They see people dying, they see their friends dying, and then they could have nightmares or random avoidance. It has to be a direct experience, witnessing an event in person as it occurs to others, learning that the event occurred to a close relative or friend, extreme repaired exposure to the aftermath. You have to have at least one of these to be at least one intrusion symptom. Of recurrent voluntary memories of the event, recurrent distressing dreams of the event, dissociative reactions such as flashbacks, intense distress if exposed to trauma related to cues, and marked physiological reactions such to cues. So in my article, what is the problem being addressed? Some soldiers can develop post-traumatic stress disorder, but some do not. What could be some reasons for this? Why childhood relations could help your relationships during war? How can relationships with your fellow soldiers help you emotionally following the war? Is combat and PTSD related? So, some prior research that was done before this study, there were studies on the more recent conflicts like the Persian Gulf, Iraq, and Afghanistan. In these places, the studies were based on unit cohesion, support, or trust of your fellow soldiers, buffers soldiers from the effects of combat exposure on PTSD risk. Higher levels of unit cohesion um, are associated with lower risk of developing PTSD among soldiers exposed to combat. Pre-deployment deployment factors could be possible predictors of what soldiers might develop PTSD. Early childhood adversity could be an indicator of developing PTSD. This would be considered a low level of family cohesion, which would be linked with PTSD after war. Close relationships with at least one sibling can limit depression and mood-altering drug use. So this was all research that was done before. Um, yeah. So this is what was done in this author's research specifically. It was more specific aspects of unit cohesion, almost going beyond unit cohesion and looking more into the relationship and friendships with um fellow soldiers, how the relationships predicted the likelihood of developing PTSD. It used a longitudinal research base, which means it was over time, over a long period of time. So they used it from when they were all the way from when they were their childhood all the way till 10 months after the war. It was the first to examine World War II using longitudinal base. This means they examined them from adolescence to adulthood, like I said. Two of their hypotheses were better relationship quality with fellow soldiers would be linked with fewer PTSD symptoms reported immediately after World War II. Better relationships in childhood, as well as stable emotional adjustment in college, would predict better relationships with wartime peers and fewer post-war symptoms. Sample study, like I said, it was a World War II longitudinal study. There were 101 male World War II veterans. They were all white, upper to middle class, between 18 and 19 years old. All served in combat, started with 202 men, but only enough information to do on the 101 men. There were data for 72 of the 101 men, which branch of military they were from. 39.6% were from Navy, 21.8% were from Army, 6.9 were from Air Force, 2% were Marines, and 2% were Coast Guard. The rest were of the 28% were unknown. There were no interventions used because this was just behavior based and it was observational. So the measurements. So they did interviews with the family members and psychiatrist notes for how the men interacted with their family during adolescence. Ratings of the sibling relationship was put on a 3-point scale. Also measured the men's relationships with parents. Also on a 3-point scale, the scores were added up, and best score you could get was a 15 equals great relationship with family. A 3 equals worst relationship the soldier could have with his family. They measured combat exposure which was on a 10-point scale, exposure to a specific combat experiences, in which the soldier was exposed to danger. A point was given to the soldier for specific dangerous experiences. Closer to a 10 equals more dangerous experience. Relationship with fellow soldiers, self-reported scale on how each soldier got along with their fellow soldiers, and post-war PTSD symptoms. A psychiatrist rated by evaluation using the DSM-3. Methodology relating to the study, being able to use a longitudinal study allows the researchers to connect to soldiers' early life to their current experiences during war. You can also see how the soldiers interacted with their fellow soldiers and how their early childhood affected that. Um, okay, the major findings, more combat exposure equaled more PTSD symptoms. I will go into in the next slide more of what these numbers and like what these things mean. So actually, I'm going to do that now. So the B value tells us the strength and the direction of the relationship. So if the number is positive, both variables go up. If it is negative, one variable goes up and the other goes down. The P value tells us the finding is statistically significant to the study. In other terms, was it by chance or was it significant to the study? So if the P value is low, for example, like 0.001, that means there's less of a chance if it was random and more of significance to the study. If the p-value was 0.50, which basically means 50%, means that there's more chance the findings were random. So in the end, we found that there's no direct, I'll go into that after. So, back to the major findings. So these are with the numbers. More combat exposure equals more PTSD symptoms. So the B value was 0.058, which was positive, and zero point zero 0.00, the P value was 0.001, which means it was a lot less of a chance that it was just random. So the positive B means that as combat exposure increased, so did PTSD symptoms. Camaraderie, which is like friendship, equals fewer PTSD symptoms. It was a negative 0.147 and P equals 0.030. Since B is negative, that means there's a better relationship with fellow soldiers, would decrease the chances of PTSD symptoms. And the zero point 0.3 means it's 0.03% chance that it was random. So pretty good also for that. So a better childhood relationships equals better emotional adjustment. B equals 0.062 and P equals 0.003. This positive B means there's good childhood would then equal better emotional adjustment. So if you had a better childhood, a healthy childhood, you have better emotional stability and relationships. So, and the p-value is 0.003, so that means it's pretty much accurate with the study's findings and not just random. Emotional stability equals stronger relationships with other soldiers and better camaraderie. So this was B equals 0.380, the P was 0.001. This shows that the better emotional stability made it easier for soldiers to have a better relationship with their fellow soldiers. So there was an indirect relationship with childhood relationships and camaraderie. Okay, this is more in depth, like I talked about the p-value. Um, so I found, so in the end, we found that there's no direct relationship between early childhood relationships and PTSD symptoms, but there was an indirect relationship between childhood relationships and stability relating to be able to form bonds during wartime. This is a quote from the article. Our findings are consistent with the hypothesis that early childhood relationships may lay the groundwork for better young adult peer relations during the stressful situations as combat exposure, which may in return prevent PTSD symptoms. I'm going to go into depth a little bit more about that. It basically means that when you have better relationships as a child, it could also help you in the end to have a better relationship with your fellow soldiers, which as we just saw, could decrease PTSD symptoms. These were additional findings. Only two soldiers fit the full criteria for PTSD, so that's around 2%. And 25.7% of soldiers of the study experienced one or more PTSD symptoms, um, lower rated in older wars of PTSD. Limitations of the study. So it was only based on 101 men of a very big war. Um, It was only they only studied educated white men, not a very diverse research study, and not tested in multiple populations. Most soldiers in the study had a good emotional adjustment previous to the war. May not be the case for a lot of soldiers. Mostly upper middle class men, all from two-parent houses. Could be different findings for female soldiers. It goes into a little bit of depth of how obviously men and women are different. So you don't know if this could be a totally different finding for women. And it could be a bias in the assessments because it's coming from the parents and the soldiers themselves when it comes to certain questionnaires they took. So why are these findings relevant? Long-term studies like these are important to know a healthy childhood could affect your future and the way you handle traumatic situations like war. It also could show that friendship and close bonds could help you through trauma. It also is important to know that this information for soldiers that go to war, knowing in advance about this research could help you be helpful for men going into war, which basically means like if you didn't have a good childhood, maybe you take a step back, you don't know what could be a deal breaker for you. Knowing what could help prevent PTSD is also important. What could better the study? We could definitely add more diverse groups, include people from other races, people from other classes, which means like not all middle class men, maybe lower class, upper class. Research women's experiences in war. Go outside of the United States and research other countries' experiences in World War II and add a more scientific standpoint with brain scanning. So the soldiers that did experience PTSD symptoms, we could maybe use a type of brain scanning to see what goes on in the brain. Maybe there's something linked in these soldiers' brains. I did two quotes that I thought were important. Strengths of this investigation include its naturalistic longitudinal design, use of multiple methods, self-reports, interviews, multiple assessors, and post-war measurements are done within 10 months after the return. So I thought this was important because it shows why this study is so different because they went from when they were young to all the way until after war, and they got their results back from after the war pretty quick. So it wasn't after a long time. And they used self-reports, interviews. They interviewed families. They interviewed them. They used psychiatrist help. So it was a good study overall. Pre-war emotional adjustment was also examined as a moderator of the link between combat number of PTSD symptoms, but the interaction long term was not significant, suggesting the specific role of relationship factors during rather than prior to wartime. I think this is important because we can't just go into that there was a direct relationship. It could be that it was a reason of childhood experiences, but we don't know the full story and information. But there are indirect links to the whole thing.